I had always thought of my family as my fortress. My husband had passed away years ago, and my son, Daniel, had always been my rock. Our family was small but close-knit. It had always been just the two of us, until Lisa came along. At first, I liked her. She was charming, sweet, and eager to please. I was happy to see Daniel settle down with someone he loved. But over time, I started to see things that bothered me. Little things, like the way she'd suggest spending money, how she'd drop hints about the future, our future, without ever asking. It was subtle, but it was there. And slowly, the seed of suspicion started to grow. I'll never forget that night. It was a quiet evening, like most others. We were having dinner, and everything seemed fine. But then I overheard a conversation that stopped me in my tracks. I had walked into the living room, only intending to grab some water, when I heard Lisa's voice, soft and calm, but there was something about it that sent a chill down my spine. "We need to start planning for the inheritance," she said. "It's the only way we'll be able to get the house paid off before it's too late." I froze. I thought I had heard wrong. My heart raced, and my stomach dropped. Inheritance? I had never talked about my will with anyone, let alone with Lisa. But there it was, my daughter-in-law, casually discussing my estate as though it was already hers to claim. I didn't know what to do. Should I confront her? I couldn't. Not yet. I needed to be sure. But one thing was certain, I had to keep my eyes open. There was more to Lisa than I had thought, and the first glimpse of her plan was just beginning to unfold. It had been a peaceful evening, the kind of evening I cherished since my husband's passing. Just the two of us now, Daniel, my son, and I. We shared the quiet, content in our routine, having dinner together at the table. The house felt warm, safe even, the flickering candlelight casting shadows on the walls. Life was simple, but it worked for us. Or so I thought. I had always been protective of my family. I never thought much of it when Daniel married Lisa. She seemed perfect for him, at least at first. She was beautiful, charming, attentive, everything I could have hoped for in a daughter-in-law. But as time passed, I began to notice small things that didn't sit right with me. The way she would always find a way to get involved in family decisions, as if her opinion was the one that mattered most. The little suggestions she made, always about money, or investments, or the future. It was subtle, but it was there, and I began to wonder if I was the only one noticing it. One evening, as we sat together at dinner, I overheard something I wasn't meant to hear. The conversation was hushed at first, just a whisper, but my ears perked up when I heard the words I never expected. I had gotten up from the table to grab some water, and in the quiet, I heard Lisa speaking to Daniel from the other room. "We need to start planning for the inheritance," she said. Her tone was so calm, so casual. "It's the only way we'll be able to get the house paid off before it's too late." I stopped dead in my tracks. My hand froze, the glass of water slipping from my fingers and landing with a soft thud on the counter. My heart raced as I stood there, motionless, trying to process what I had just heard. Inheritance? What inheritance? My inheritance? I didn't know whether to confront her, to walk in there and demand an explanation, but I held back. I couldn't be sure. I had to know more before jumping to conclusions. But in that moment, everything I thought I knew about my daughter-in-law, about my family, seemed to shatter into pieces. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about trust. It was about something deeper, something I didn't want to acknowledge. I stayed silent, quietly returning to my seat at the table, pretending nothing had happened. I kept my eyes on my plate, my thoughts running wild, trying to make sense of it all. But my mind was spinning. Was this just a slip of the tongue? A misunderstanding? Or was Lisa really plotting something behind my back? The thought that she might be after my inheritance, something I had worked my entire life for, made my stomach turn. I couldn't believe it, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The rest of the dinner was a blur. I couldn't focus on the conversation. All I could hear was the image of her voice, the words hanging in the air like a dark cloud. I needed answers, but I had to be careful. I couldn't confront Lisa directly, not yet. I needed proof. I needed to know just how deep her plans went. The following days were a blur of quiet observation. I paid closer attention to her movements, her words, the subtle way she tried to influence Daniel. I watched her carefully, knowing I had to be discreet. I couldn't let her know that I knew. Not yet. But one thing was clear. I wasn't just dealing with a daughter-in-law anymore. I was dealing with someone who had a plan, and it didn't include me. I had always trusted Lisa. I had always believed that she was a part of our family, that she had Daniel's best interests at heart. But now, I wasn't so sure. The truth was becoming harder to ignore, and the more I uncovered, the more I realized I was dealing with a betrayal far deeper than I had ever imagined. The first glimpse of her true intentions had been revealed, and now, it was up to me to find out just how far she was willing to go. I couldn't let her manipulate us, destroy everything I had built, without doing something about it. But I couldn't confront her without solid evidence. I had to be smart. I had to outmaneuver her, and that's when I began my search. The days that followed were filled with a quiet tension, a low hum of uncertainty that buzzed in the back of my mind. I kept thinking about the conversation I had overheard. Lisa's words echoed in my thoughts constantly. "We need to start planning for the inheritance." It haunted me, and the more I thought about it, the more convinced I became that something wasn't right. I couldn't ignore it anymore. But I knew one thing for sure: I had to be careful. Confronting her without the full picture could backfire, and I couldn't risk losing my son, Daniel, over something that might be a misunderstanding. The last thing I wanted was to turn this into a battle between us, so I had to gather more evidence, slowly, quietly, without tipping my hand. I began paying even closer attention to Lisa's behavior, watching for the signs I had missed before. Her subtle manipulations weren't as easy to detect as I had thought. She was always so composed, so confident in her actions. But now, I saw the cracks. The little hints that slipped out when she thought no one was listening. The way she'd casually bring up the topic of money, inheritance, or properties in conversations. It wasn't just small talk. It was intentional, and it was calculated. I spent the next few days carefully observing her whenever I could, quietly taking note of the things she said and did. I started to notice that she was often on the phone, speaking in hushed tones, sometimes pacing back and forth, as if trying to keep her conversations private. There was a sense of urgency to her actions, a level of secrecy that sent warning signals in my mind. One afternoon, as I was cleaning out the kitchen drawers, I found a piece of paper that shouldn't have been there. It was a document with my name on it, one that looked too official to be a simple form or a piece of mail. My heart skipped a beat as I reached for it. I knew immediately that this was something important. The document was a list of assets, properties, bank accounts, and other investments. The numbers didn't mean much to me, but the way the list was formatted felt wrong. This wasn't something I'd put together. I'd never given anyone permission to look at my financial records. I had always been careful about those things, keeping everything locked away and private. What struck me even more was the notation at the bottom of the document: subject to transfer upon inheritance. I stood frozen for a moment, the paper trembling in my hands. This was no simple mistake. This was something far more sinister. Lisa had access to my financial details, and she was planning to act on them. I had to act quickly. The next day, I decided to investigate further. I went through the drawers in my office, the ones that contained all of my financial records. Everything seemed in order, but then I came across a folder that hadn't been there before. It was tucked away in the back of the drawer, hidden from sight, but it was clearly something Lisa had placed there. My blood ran cold as I opened it and found several documents, one of which was a draft of my will. The draft wasn't mine. I could tell immediately that it wasn't in my handwriting. It had been altered in places, and there were sections of the document that I hadn't signed. The will was almost identical to the one I had written years ago, but the changes were subtle, and they were all in Lisa's favor. I slammed the folder shut, my mind racing. This was it, the evidence I needed to confront her. But as I sat there, the weight of what I had discovered started to settle in. I couldn't just accuse her without being certain. I had to be careful. If Lisa was truly trying to steal from me, if she was willing to manipulate my son and me to get what she wanted, then I needed to gather more, much more, before taking any action. That night, I stayed up late, going through every document I could find: bank statements, deeds, personal papers, anything that could give me insight into Lisa's intentions. The more I dug, the more I found. Lisa had been meticulously laying the groundwork for her plan for months, possibly even longer. She had been forging my signature, altering documents, and trying to manipulate both Daniel and me into making decisions that benefited her. I was overwhelmed by the magnitude of it all. How had I been so blind? Lisa had been playing us both, Daniel, my own flesh and blood, and me, the person who had welcomed her into my family. But I couldn't dwell on the past anymore. I had to act. I had to confront her, but this time, I was going to do it right. I wasn't going to let her walk away unscathed. I spent the next day preparing. I hired a lawyer, someone who had experience dealing with situations like this. I knew that going into this unprepared would be my biggest mistake, and I couldn't afford to lose. My entire life's work, my legacy, was at stake. I couldn't let Lisa take that from me, not without a fight. The lawyer advised me to keep the confrontation low-key, at least for now. No public accusations. No dramatic confrontations. We would gather more evidence and then make our move when the time was right. I agreed. The stakes were too high for anything less. But as the days passed, I grew more and more anxious. Lisa was still walking around my house like nothing had changed, acting as if everything was normal. I couldn't shake the feeling that she was too confident, too calm. It was almost as if she knew the outcome already, as if she knew she was going to win. But I wasn't going to let that happen, not without a fight. It had been weeks since I had uncovered Lisa's manipulation, weeks of silent observation, careful planning, and quiet preparation. I felt like a predator, stalking my prey, but the prey wasn't just Lisa, it was my own family. The thought made me sick to my stomach, but it was a reality I had no choice but to face. I had kept my distance, acting like nothing had changed. Even as the weight of the evidence against her grew heavier by the day, I had to keep my emotions in check, and yet, each day that passed, my anger festered. I had tried to reason with myself, telling myself that Lisa couldn't really be planning something so diabolical, but deep down, I knew it was true. I had the proof, and now, I had to confront her. The moment I'd been avoiding finally arrived. It was a Friday night, another quiet dinner with my son and Lisa. I had deliberately kept the evening low-key, knowing that this would be the night I would have to confront her. It would be uncomfortable, yes, but it was the only way to get the truth. No more games, no more pretending. As we sat at the dinner table, Lisa, as usual, was the picture of composure. She smiled, laughed at Daniel's jokes, and looked at me with that calm, almost too perfect demeanor. She had no idea I knew what she had been doing behind my back. And yet, there was a certain smugness about her, an air of superiority that seemed to say she had already won. It infuriated me. Daniel seemed relaxed, unaware of the storm brewing just beneath the surface. I could see that he had no idea of the betrayal that had been unfolding right under his nose. Part of me hated that it had to come to this, but the other part of me knew it was the only way to protect him from the person he had married. Lisa, I began, my voice steady, calm, but carrying an edge. I need to talk to you. Her eyes flicked up, her smile faltering for a moment before it returned. Of course, Mom. What's on your mind? I glanced at Daniel briefly, then back at her. The moment felt thick, heavy, as if the air itself knew what was coming. Sit down, I said, my voice unwavering. This needs to be said. I waited until she had taken her seat, then slowly, methodically, I reached for the folder I had prepared, the one containing all the evidence of her betrayal. I opened it in front of her, letting her see the documents one by one. Her eyes darted over the pages, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of something in her expression, panic, maybe, or guilt. But she quickly masked it, leaning back in her chair. Do you recognize these? I asked, watching her carefully. Lisa didn't respond immediately. Instead, she straightened her posture, adjusting her position, as though preparing for a battle. What are you talking about? She replied coolly. I placed a bank statement on the table, then a forged document, one of many I had uncovered over the past weeks. These documents are in your handwriting. You've been planning to take my inheritance, haven't you? You've been manipulating Daniel, forging my signature, and attempting to steal from me. I could feel the tension rising, the silence between us thick with unspoken words. Lisa's face didn't betray her emotions at first. She stared at the papers, her lips pressed into a thin line, before she spoke, her voice steady, but colder than before. You have no idea what you're talking about, she said, her words laced with a false sweetness. These documents, they don't mean anything. I could see the cracks forming, her confidence starting to waver. But she wasn't ready to admit anything. Not yet. I know what you've been doing, Lisa, I pressed, my voice rising just slightly. I've seen the forged will, the bank accounts you've opened in my name. You've been planning this for months, trying to take everything I've worked for. You thought you could control Daniel, manipulate him into signing things over to you. But I'm not going to let you. Her eyes narrowed, and I saw the mask slip. For a moment, I saw the anger and the true nature of the woman sitting across from me. You think you can stop me? She spat, her voice venomous. You think you're the only one who can control everything? This is my life now, not yours. I've worked just as hard as you have. I deserve what's coming to me. The words stung, but I didn't flinch. I couldn't. This was my moment to take back control, to protect what was mine. You don't deserve anything, I said, my voice hardening. Not after everything you've done. Lisa stood up abruptly, knocking her chair back. You have no idea what you're talking about. You're just a bitter, old woman, trying to hold on to a past that doesn't matter anymore. She turned toward Daniel, her voice becoming more pleading. Daniel, you have to see what she's doing. She's trying to turn you against me. You can't let her. Daniel had been sitting quietly, watching the exchange unfold before him, but his face was pale, his eyes flicking between Lisa and me, confusion written all over him. I could see the struggle in his face, the pain of being caught in the middle of this, the betrayal, and the truth that had come crashing down around him. Daniel, you need to understand, I said, my voice softer now. She's been using you. She's been lying to you, manipulating you into doing what she wants. I watched him carefully, hoping that he would finally see the truth, but instead, I saw the conflict in his eyes, the doubt creeping in. He opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out at first. The silence stretched between us like an eternity. I don't know what to think anymore, Daniel whispered, his voice cracking. I want to believe you, Mom, but I love her. I married her. How could she do something like this? Lisa's eyes gleamed with victory for a moment, but I wasn't done yet. I wasn't going to let her manipulate him any further. I have everything I need to prove it, I said, my voice steady, though my heart was racing. She's been playing us both. It's time for you to wake up. The room was heavy with silence as Daniel sat back, his hands gripping the edge of the table. I could see the fight in him, the desire to protect his wife, but the nagging realization that something wasn't right. Finally, he stood up, his face a mixture of fear and anger. I need time, he said, his voice breaking as he turned to leave the room. I stood there, watching him go. It was the hardest thing I had ever had to do, to put my son in a position where he had to choose between his wife and me. But I had no choice. I couldn't let Lisa win. As I sat back down, the weight of the moment hit me. I had done what I needed to do. Now, it was up to Daniel to find his own way through the mess that Lisa had created. The days that followed the confrontation felt like an endless stretch of time. The house was quieter than usual. Daniel had withdrawn, retreating into himself as if the weight of everything had crushed him. Lisa, too, had become distant, no longer playing the part of the charming wife but now wearing the face of someone who was on the defensive. I could see the guilt in her eyes when she thought no one was looking, but I knew better than to trust her now. The battle had just begun, and it wasn't just a personal one anymore. It was going to be a fight for everything I had worked for. I had thought about confronting her directly, demanding that she leave my home, but I knew that wasn't the right move. I needed more than just her word to prove what she had done. I had already uncovered so much, but I needed to ensure that I could back it up in court. I couldn't risk losing. Not after everything she had done. I called my lawyer, a woman who had been with me through some minor legal issues in the past. Her name was Claire, and I trusted her more than anyone else. The moment I told her what had happened, I could hear the shock in her voice, but there was also determination. She was on my side, and that meant everything. Let's make sure we have everything we need to win this, she said when we met a few days later. We'll start by gathering all the evidence. You have the bank records, the forged will, and the testimony about the phone calls. Let's make sure we are airtight before we make our move. It was a relief to hear her confidence. Claire was sharp, and she wasn't going to let Lisa get away with anything. The next few weeks were a blur of legal documents, meetings, and late nights spent going through everything I had collected. I couldn't believe how much I had uncovered. Lisa had been playing a long game, trying to position herself as the rightful heir to my estate. She'd altered my will, opened bank accounts in my name, and even forged my signature on several legal documents. But it wasn't just about the inheritance anymore. It was about control. It was about the lies she had told Daniel, the manipulation that had gone on behind my back for so long. I wasn't just fighting for money, I was fighting for my family, for the truth to come out, for the trust that had been shattered. The first court hearing was scheduled, and I felt a surge of anxiety course through me. I wasn't sure what to expect, but I knew it wasn't going to be easy. Lisa's lawyer was already well known for his aggressive tactics, and I had no doubt he would do everything in his power to turn this against me. I wasn't prepared to back down, though. Not now. Not after everything I had fought for. When the day of the hearing arrived, I felt like I was walking into a lion's den. The courtroom was full, the air thick with anticipation. My lawyer was by my side, looking calm but focused, while I sat in the witness box, trying to keep my hands from shaking. Lisa was seated with her lawyer, her face a mask of composure, but I could see the tension in her eyes, the subtle flicker of uncertainty beneath the surface. She knew what was coming. The trial began with the usual formalities, opening statements, introductions, the usual rigmarole. But the moment Lisa's lawyer stood up to speak, I knew this was going to be a battle of manipulation. Your Honor, Lisa's lawyer began, his voice smooth and confident, this is nothing more than a case of family dysfunction. My client, Mrs. Lisa Matthews, is a woman who has been unfairly accused. This is simply a baseless claim of inheritance fraud, designed to malign her reputation and jeopardize her future. His words hung in the air, slick with falsehoods. My heart raced. This wasn't going to be easy, but Claire was ready. She stood up to respond, her voice calm but firm. Your Honor, the accusations made by Mrs. Matthews' lawyer are false. The evidence we have here today clearly shows that Mrs. Matthews has forged documents and tampered with legal records in order to steal from her mother-in-law, Mrs. Williams. We have bank records, forged signatures, and a draft of an altered will that proves her intent. I sat there, my heart pounding, as the lawyer began to present the evidence. One by one, Claire laid out the documents I had gathered, the altered bank records, the forged will, the list of assets with Lisa's name all over them. Each document was like a nail in the coffin, a piece of the puzzle falling into place. But Lisa wasn't backing down. She looked at Daniel, her eyes pleading with him silently. She was trying to turn him against me, trying to manipulate him into believing her lies. I could see him waver, his gaze darting between the two of us. The struggle was clear in his eyes. He didn't know who to trust. Daniel, I said softly, my voice carrying across the room, you know the truth. You've seen the evidence. I haven't lied to you. Lisa's eyes shot daggers at me, but I didn't flinch. This was the moment I had to fight for, not just for my inheritance, but for my son's trust. For the next few hours, the courtroom became a battlefield. Lisa's lawyer was relentless, trying to twist the facts and discredit me at every turn, but Claire was prepared. She countered every argument, and the evidence was undeniable. Lisa's manipulation was becoming clearer by the minute. I could see the tension building in the room. Daniel hadn't spoken much, but I could tell he was listening closely, trying to piece everything together. I didn't want to put him in the middle of this, but I knew he had to see the truth for himself. As the day went on, I began to feel a sense of dread. What if this wasn't enough? What if the judge didn't believe me? Lisa had managed to twist everything before, and she was skilled at manipulating others. But then, as the hearing came to a close, something unexpected happened. Lisa's lawyer had presented all his arguments, and the judge asked if there were any further statements. It was then that I saw it, the smallest crack in Lisa's armor. She seemed agitated, her confident facade slipping for just a moment. I wasn't sure what it meant, but I knew it was a sign. She wasn't as in control as she thought she was. The courtroom fell into an uneasy silence. Everyone seemed to be waiting for something, for the judge to speak, for the lawyers to make their final arguments. But there was more at play here than I could have anticipated. I had spent hours preparing, combing through documents, and putting together a case that I thought was ironclad. But I hadn't anticipated what would happen next. The judge, a stern man with a reputation for being fair but tough, leaned forward, his eyes focused on Lisa. The air in the room seemed to grow heavier, the tension palpable. And then, unexpectedly, the judge spoke, his voice breaking the stillness. Mrs. Matthews, he said, his voice firm but not unkind. Is it true that you've been in possession of several documents related to Mrs. Williams' estate that have not been presented in court? Documents that may or may not include her signature? For a split second, Lisa's face betrayed her. Her eyes widened ever so slightly, and for the briefest moment, she seemed taken aback. I didn't know what to make of it. But then, as quickly as it appeared, she regained her composure, smoothing her expression into one of cool indifference. My lawyer and I have already explained the situation, Your Honor, she replied smoothly, but there was something off about her tone, something too rehearsed, too practiced. I don't see why we need to rehash these documents. This is all simply a misunderstanding. But I knew better. I had seen the signs. Lisa was rattled. She wasn't as confident as she wanted us to believe. She had underestimated me, thought she could get away with it. But I had the evidence. I had proof. And I wasn't about to let her manipulate me again. I'm afraid there's no misunderstanding, I said, my voice clear and unwavering. These documents weren't just misunderstood. They were forged. They were manipulated. And the truth is coming out today. You can't hide behind lies anymore. The room was silent for a moment. Everyone was watching us, Lisa, her lawyer, Daniel. Even the judge seemed to be weighing his next words carefully. I could feel the weight of the moment. This was it. This was my chance to expose Lisa once and for all. I have here, I continued, standing up and moving to the table. A video recording of a conversation I had with Mrs. Matthews a few weeks ago. It's an audio recording, not the video, but it clearly shows her talking about altering my financial records and preparing to forge my will. And here, I held up another document, is proof that she's been transferring funds from my accounts into hers without my consent. I looked over at Lisa, watching as the color drained from her face. Her perfectly composed facade had crumbled, and now, I could see the fear in her eyes, but she still wasn't ready to give up. She quickly turned to her lawyer, whispering something too low for me to hear, her hand shaking slightly. But the damage was done. There was no turning back now. My client has nothing to do with these documents, Lisa's lawyer interjected quickly, trying to regain control of the situation. The authenticity of these files is questionable. There's no real evidence to support the claim that Mrs. Matthews has been tampering with any documents. These are merely baseless accusations. Enough, the judge snapped, his voice cutting through the commotion. Mrs. Williams has presented evidence, and we will review it thoroughly. This hearing is adjourned for today. The gavel slammed down, signaling the end of the hearing for the day. But as the courtroom began to empty, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. Lisa wasn't as confident as she had been. Her grip on the situation was slipping, and I could feel it. I left the courtroom with Claire by my side, my mind racing with the implications of what had just transpired. But there was still so much to process. Lisa hadn't spoken a word to me after the hearing ended, and neither had Daniel. He had been distant all day, lost in his thoughts, unsure of what to believe. I was on edge, knowing the next hearing was just around the corner. Lisa wasn't going to back down so easily. I needed to prepare for whatever she was going to throw at me next. But this time, I was ready. I had the truth on my side, and I wasn't going to let her win. The day ended with more questions than answers, but one thing was clear. The fight was far from over. The days between the last hearing and the next seemed to drag on, each one filled with a mix of anticipation and dread. I couldn't stop thinking about the things Lisa had said in the courtroom, her smug, rehearsed words. But what had stuck with me most was the moment of weakness in her eyes. For just a split second, I had seen the fear. She was losing control, and I knew it. The following week, we were back in court. This time, it felt different. There was a heightened sense of urgency in the air, as if everyone in the courtroom knew this was the final round, the last chance for either side to make their case. Lisa, with her cool demeanor, was seated at her lawyer's side, her eyes scanning the room. Daniel, sitting beside me, was more withdrawn than ever, and I could feel the tension between us. He hadn't spoken much since the last hearing. His face had become a mask of uncertainty, and I could tell that every word spoken in that room weighed on him. I had prepared for this moment. My lawyer, Claire, had told me that this was it, the moment where everything would come to a head. Lisa's lawyer would attempt to deflect, to cast doubt, but I was ready. I had the evidence, the recordings, the documents, and the witnesses. There was no turning back. The judge entered the room, and the proceedings began with the usual formalities. The air was thick with tension as both sides presented their opening statements. Lisa's lawyer was quick to claim that the evidence I presented was inadmissible, that it was circumstantial at best, and that it lacked the necessary foundation to stand in court. His words were sharp, but I wasn't intimidated. He had tried to discredit everything I'd worked for, but this time, I was prepared to go all the way. When it was my turn, I stood with the full weight of the evidence behind me. Claire gave me a brief nod of encouragement as I approached the witness stand. The courtroom felt suffocating, every eye on me, but I focused on what was important, the truth. I started with the basics, explaining how I had uncovered the forged documents, the bank accounts, the false transfers, and the subtle manipulation Lisa had been executing over the past months. I showed the court the recordings I had taken, the ones that clearly captured Lisa discussing the alteration of my will and her plans to manipulate Daniel into signing over control of my estate. The room was silent as I presented each piece of evidence, one by one, but I could feel the weight of every word I spoke. Then, just as I had done before, I turned to Daniel. My heart twisted at the sight of him, sitting there, torn between his loyalty to his wife and his love for me. Daniel, I said softly, my voice carrying across the room, I know this is hard, but you need to see the truth. This isn't just about inheritance. It's about trust. Your wife, the woman you married, has been using you, manipulating you, for months. I didn't want to believe it. I didn't want to hurt you, but the truth is right here. And now, you need to make a choice. Lisa's face twisted with anger, but she said nothing. She simply sat there, her eyes burning into mine, trying to hold onto the control she had once had. Daniel didn't look at me. He didn't even acknowledge my words. He was staring at the floor, his hands clenched in his lap. I could feel the frustration building inside me, but I couldn't push him. Not like this. The judge called for a brief recess, and as the courtroom cleared, I stayed in my seat, my hands trembling slightly. I had done everything I could, but I didn't know if it was enough. I didn't know if Daniel would finally see the truth, or if Lisa's influence would still have a hold on him. When we returned, it was Lisa's turn to present her defense. She stood with her lawyer beside her, a cool, practiced look on her face. I could tell she was preparing for her last-ditch effort to manipulate the situation. Your Honor, Lisa's lawyer began, his voice steady and confident, this case has been nothing more than a personal vendetta against my client. My client has done nothing wrong. The accusations are based on nothing but hearsay and doctored evidence. The only reason Mrs. Williams is bringing these charges is because she is bitter about her son's happiness and has decided to tear apart her family to hold on to her inheritance. The courtroom was stunned into silence. Lisa stood there, her face flushed with fake indignation, her eyes never leaving mine. I could feel the blood rushing in my ears as she continued to speak, but I wasn't going to let her manipulate the situation anymore. I stood up abruptly. Your Honor, I said, my voice shaking but firm, this isn't about a vendetta. This is about truth. It's about protecting what's mine. It's about protecting my family from the person who has been lying and stealing from me for months. And now, it's time for the truth to come out. I turned to Lisa, my gaze steady, refusing to look away. You've been playing us both, Lisa. You've been using your charm to manipulate everyone around you, but I won't let you do it anymore. Not to me, not to Daniel. This is over. The silence in the room was deafening. For a moment, no one moved. Lisa's expression twisted, her lips trembling as she tried to speak, but nothing came out. Her eyes were wide, her mask slipping for the first time. The control she had once wielded so effortlessly was crumbling. Then, the judge's voice cut through the tension. Enough. I've heard enough. I held my breath, my heart pounding in my chest as the judge stood up, preparing to deliver his verdict. The judge's decision came down like a hammer, breaking the silence that had settled over the room. His voice echoed in the courtroom, each word a stark contrast to the tension that had been building for days. After reviewing the evidence, and hearing both sides, it is clear that Mrs. Matthews has been engaged in fraudulent actions, manipulating not only the financial records but also the trust of those closest to her, the judge said, his tone firm. The case against her is undeniable. The alterations made to Mrs. Williams' will and the financial misconduct were intentional and malicious. Mrs. Matthews is hereby disqualified from inheriting any part of Mrs. Williams' estate, and all actions taken by her regarding this matter will be considered null and void. My heart pounded in my chest, the relief washing over me in waves. I had won. The truth had prevailed. Lisa's betrayal was exposed for what it was, and the judge's ruling was the victory I had fought for. But even as the courtroom erupted into murmurs, a part of me remained cold. The victory was bittersweet. Lisa's expression was a study in disbelief, her face pale as she slowly sank into the chair beside her lawyer. She didn't speak, but the anger in her eyes was unmistakable. She had been bested, but it wasn't the end for her, not by a long shot. I glanced at Daniel, who had been silent throughout the hearing. His face was still blank, his emotions unreadable. He didn't react to the ruling, didn't show relief or sadness, just a hollow emptiness that made my stomach turn. My son, the person I had fought for, was caught in the middle of a mess I had created. And now, with the trial behind us, I wasn't sure how to fix what had been broken. I stood up slowly, my knees weak from the tension of the last few hours. Claire, my lawyer, gave me a small smile, a silent acknowledgement of the hard work we'd put in to get to this point. But as I turned to leave the courtroom, I couldn't shake the feeling that everything I had worked for was still slipping through my fingers. The moment I stepped outside, Daniel finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. Mom, he said, his eyes tired but searching mine. What now? I opened my mouth to answer, but the words didn't come right away. What now? It felt like the question of the century. After everything, what was left for us? The last few months had taken everything from us: trust, love, respect. I didn't know how to fix it. I don't know, Daniel, I said quietly, my voice trembling slightly, but I want to start over. I want us to move forward, together. He looked at me for a long moment before nodding, his gaze softening. He didn't say anything else, but there was something in the way he stood there, his shoulders no longer as tense, that gave me hope. Maybe, just maybe, We could rebuild what had been broken, but it wouldn't be easy. As I drove home later that day, the weight of the ruling settled into my chest. Lisa had been stripped of her claims, but I knew that wasn't the end of the story. What would happen to her now? What would happen to me, to my family, to Daniel, and me? The aftermath of betrayal was never simple. Even when the truth came out, it didn't guarantee that everything would return to normal. The trust that had been lost couldn't be repaired overnight. But what I had learned through all of this was that nothing was more powerful than the truth. Even when it hurt, even when it tore families apart, the truth was the one thing no one could take away from you. The weeks after the trial passed slowly. Daniel and I found a tentative peace, but it was fragile. There was a distance between us that hadn't been there before. I could see that Daniel was struggling to make sense of everything, the lies, the betrayal, the fact that his wife had done something unforgivable. I couldn't blame him. He had loved her. He had trusted her. And now, he was left to pick up the pieces. But every day, I could see him trying. I saw the way he would look at me, the small gestures of support, the moments when he would ask how I was doing. It wasn't much, but it was progress. It had to be. One afternoon, we sat down together over a cup of tea, something we used to do before everything had spiraled out of control. It felt familiar, almost comforting, but the tension was still there, hanging between us like a dark cloud. "Mom," Daniel started, his voice hesitant. "I've been thinking a lot about everything. About Lisa. About what happened. I don't know how to explain it, but I've been angry. At you. At myself. At everything." I looked at him, my heart aching. "I know, Daniel. I know. I never wanted to put you in this position. I never wanted you to feel torn between me and her. But you have to understand something. I did what I did to protect you. I didn't want to hurt you. I wanted to protect our family, even if that meant making hard choices." He nodded, his expression softening. "I get it, Mom. I do. And I know you were just trying to protect me. I wasn't seeing things clearly. I let Lisa get to me. But I'm not going to let that happen again." We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the conversation settling over us. There was so much left unsaid, but for the first time in weeks, I felt like we were on the path to healing. It wasn't perfect, and I didn't know if it would ever be the same, but I knew that as long as we were both willing to try, we could move forward. The next few weeks were spent rebuilding what had been broken. It wasn't easy, but we both knew that trust had to be earned. With every conversation, every shared moment, we slowly rebuilt the foundation of our relationship. It wasn't quick, it wasn't clean, but it was real. The courtroom had emptied, but the weight of the verdict lingered in the air, thick and suffocating. I sat in the passenger seat of my car, my hands gripping the sides of the seat, feeling the ache of exhaustion settling in. I could feel the adrenaline that had carried me through the trial slowly wearing off. My body ached, my mind was foggy, but my thoughts were clear. I had won. And yet, victory didn't feel like it should. In fact, it felt hollow. I glanced over at Daniel, who was sitting beside me. His face was unreadable, his hands clenched in his lap, his body turned slightly away from me. I could feel the emotional distance between us, the gulf that had widened over the past few weeks. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about trust, family, and the brutal reality of betrayal. The fight had been for more than my inheritance. It had been for my son. And yet, here we were, miles apart. I had won the legal battle, but had I lost the war with Daniel? I couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt. He hadn't wanted to be caught in the middle of all this, but he had been. He had been manipulated by Lisa, just as I had feared. And now, he was struggling to make sense of everything. The betrayal wasn't just about Lisa's actions anymore. It was about the confusion that had taken root in Daniel's heart. As we arrived home, I watched him carefully. He stepped out of the car slowly, almost hesitantly. For the first time in a long while, I saw my son unsure of what to do, and I couldn't help but feel a surge of guilt. I had dragged him into this mess, forced him to choose between me and the woman he had loved, and even now, I wasn't sure he had made his choice. Not completely. "Daniel," I began, but my voice faltered. I wasn't sure how to begin. How could I fix this? Could I even fix this? He turned to face me, his eyes tired, his face drawn with exhaustion. "Mom," he said, his voice quiet, "I don't know what to say. Everything's been so messed up lately. I thought I knew what was real, but it's like everything's upside down." I stepped forward, wanting to bridge the gap between us, but unsure of how. "I know it's been hard, sweetheart, but you have to understand, everything I've done, every decision I've made, It was all to protect you. I didn't want you to be manipulated. I didn't want you to be hurt. He looked at me, his eyes searching mine. I know, Mom, I do. But it's not just about you and me anymore. It's about her too. I loved Lisa. I trusted her. I don't even know how to process all of this. I saw the conflict in his eyes, the pain, the hurt. Lisa had manipulated both of us, but Daniel had been the one truly torn apart by it. I could see it in the way he spoke, in the way he was still defending her in his mind, even after everything that had come to light. She betrayed you, Daniel. She betrayed both of us. But I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. You don't have to do this alone. He shook his head slowly, his voice heavy with emotion. I don't even know who she is anymore. I thought I knew her. I thought we had a future. But she was just using me, wasn't she? And now, I don't know what to feel. I don't know how to get past this. I reached out to touch his arm gently. We'll figure it out. Together. We are family, and that's what matters. We'll rebuild what's been broken, one step at a time. The look in his eyes softened for just a moment, but the sadness remained. He didn't say anything else, just nodded and walked past me, heading inside. I stood there for a long time, letting the silence of the moment wash over me. It felt like everything was in limbo. The trial had ended, but the emotional fallout had only just begun. The next few days were a blur of uneasy silence. Daniel kept his distance, retreating into his work, burying himself in tasks that seemed to distract him from the mess around us. I could see him trying to escape it all, trying to avoid the inevitable confrontation with his feelings. But I knew that wasn't the answer. This wasn't something that could be ignored. This was something we needed to face head on. But every time I tried to reach out, to talk, he pulled away. It was like trying to touch a shadow, there, but not there. His mind was elsewhere, caught in the storm that had been set in motion by Lisa's betrayal. I couldn't let this go on. I couldn't let him keep drowning in confusion and anger. I had to do something. One evening, after dinner, I found him sitting on the porch, looking out at the horizon. The sky was fading into twilight, the colors bleeding into one another, and for a moment, it felt like the whole world had gone still. I sat down beside him, unsure of what to say, but he spoke first. Mom, he began, his voice distant. I don't know what I'm supposed to feel. I'm angry, but I'm not sure at who. At Lisa? At you? At myself? I let his words sink in, my heart heavy with the weight of everything he had said. It's okay to be confused, Daniel. But you don't have to carry this burden alone. I'm here for you. I always will be. He didn't respond at first, but I could feel the change in the air. Slowly, he turned to me, his eyes filled with unshed tears. I don't know if I'll ever forgive her, but I don't know if I can forgive myself for not seeing it. I should have known. I should have protected you. I reached out, placing my hand gently on his. You were blinded by love, Daniel. We all are, at some point, but you're not to blame for what happened. You're not responsible for her actions. We can't change the past, but we can start fresh. We can rebuild, together. For the first time in days, I saw a flicker of hope in his eyes. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Do you think we can? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I know we can, I said firmly. We've been through worse, and we are still here. We'll find our way back, one step at a time. He nodded, his shoulders sagging with the weight of everything that had happened, but there was a small sense of relief in his posture. It wasn't a resolution, but it was a start, a tiny crack in the walls he had built around his heart. The weeks that followed were a slow process of rebuilding. Daniel began to let me in again, little by little. We spent more time together, talking, sharing, listening. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. Lisa was gone, but the damage she had done wasn't so easily erased. We had to work through it, both of us, in our own way. As for me, I had come to understand something crucial in all of this. Even after the trial was over, the real work had just begun. The legal battle had been won, but now, I had to rebuild the most important thing of all, the trust between my son and me. And even though the path ahead was uncertain, I knew one thing for sure: we would walk it together. It had been a few months since the trial, and though the courtroom drama was behind us, the emotional aftermath still lingered like an old wound. But in that time, I had learned that healing was a gradual process, and it wasn't something that could be forced or rushed. I had learned to take each day as it came, to focus on rebuilding what had been torn apart, not just with my son, but within myself. I had thought that winning the case would bring instant relief, that the burden of betrayal would simply disappear. But the reality was much messier. It wasn't about the inheritance anymore. That had been dealt with in court. What truly mattered now was mending the trust between Daniel and me, the invisible threads that had been severed by Lisa's manipulations. At first, things were strained. I could feel the distance between Daniel and me, the awkwardness of trying to rebuild something that had been broken so deeply. We were still learning how to be comfortable with each other again, how to talk openly without the weight of past betrayals hanging in the air. But there were small moments of progress, moments that showed me we were starting to heal. One afternoon, as I was cleaning out some old boxes in the attic, I found an old photo album. I had almost forgotten it existed, but as I flipped through the pages, memories rushed back. There were pictures of Daniel as a child, of family holidays and summer vacations. I paused at one photo, Daniel and I, standing on the beach during one of our trips, laughing together in the sunshine. He was so young, his face full of innocence, of pure joy. It was hard to believe that this boy, my son, had been through so much pain in recent months. I sighed, setting the album aside. The past felt like a distant world, but it also felt like something I needed to hold on to. Those memories were reminders of what we had, and what we could find again. But first, we had to heal. That evening, I decided to take a step I had been avoiding. I reached out to Daniel. It had been a while since we'd had a heart-to-heart, and I knew it was time. I called him into the living room, where I was sitting with a cup of tea, and invited him to sit down. "Daniel," I began, my voice tentative but firm, "I know we've both been struggling with everything that's happened, but I think it's time we talk, really talk, about where we are, and where we are going." He looked at me for a long moment, his eyes still haunted by the past but softening with something else, an openness, perhaps. He nodded slowly, taking a seat across from me. "I don't know how to fix this, Mom," he admitted, his voice low. "I don't know how to forgive myself for not seeing it sooner. I should have seen the signs with Lisa. I should have been there for you." I shook my head gently, feeling the sting of his words, but knowing they were coming from a place of deep regret. "Daniel, you didn't fail me. You were deceived, just like I was. What matters now is that we learn from this. We can't change the past, but we can build something better for the future." He sighed, running a hand through his hair, clearly wrestling with his own emotions. "I don't know how to move forward," he said quietly. "I don't know how to trust again, not just with her, but with everything." I understood exactly what he meant. Trust had been shattered, not just between us and Lisa, but between us as mother and son. But rebuilding it wasn't impossible. It just took time, and effort, and a willingness to be vulnerable. "I get it," I said softly, reaching out to him. "I don't have all the answers, Daniel. I'm learning, too. But I know one thing. We have to take it one step at a time. Trust isn't built in a day, but it can be rebuilt. And I'm here, every step of the way. I always will be." He looked up at me, his eyes filled with a mix of hope and uncertainty. For the first time in a long while, I saw something in him that I hadn't seen before, the willingness to try again, the openness to rebuild what had been lost. "I don't want to lose you, Mom," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't want to lose us." I smiled softly, a tear escaping despite myself. "You won't. We'll get through this together." We sat in silence for a while, but it was a peaceful silence, a silence that spoke of understanding, of healing, and of a future that was still to be written. It wasn't going to be easy, and there were still difficult conversations to have, but I knew that as long as we had each other, we could face anything. A few weeks later, I decided it was time to take another step. The house had felt empty in some ways, haunted by the memories of what had happened. Lisa had been a part of our lives for years, but now that she was gone, I could see just how much space she had taken up, not physically, but emotionally. It was time to clear out the remnants of her presence and move forward. I asked Daniel to help me go through the things that had been left behind, old gifts, photos, and letters she had left in the house. I didn't expect him to be ready for it, but to my surprise, he agreed without hesitation. As we sorted through the boxes, I could feel the weight of what had happened starting to lift. It wasn't about forgetting Lisa or pretending the past didn't happen. It was about creating new space, both physically and emotionally, for the future we were building together. By the end of the afternoon, we had cleared out everything. It was liberating, in a way, to see the house once again feeling like our home. There were no reminders of the betrayal, no lingering shadows of what had come before. That evening, we sat down to dinner together. It wasn't anything fancy, just a simple meal, but the feeling in the air was different. There was a lightness to it, a sense of hope. "I'm proud of you," Daniel, I said, looking across the table at my son. For everything. For the way you've been trying to move forward. For being willing to heal with me. I know it's not easy. He smiled. A genuine, warm smile that reached his eyes. I couldn't have done it without you, Mom. I just want us to be okay again. We are. I said softly. We are. It had been nearly 6 months since the trial ended. The dust had settled, and while the scars of betrayal still lingered, the wounds were no longer as fresh. Daniel and I had both been through the fire, tested in ways we never could have anticipated, but we had made it through. Slowly, painstakingly, we had started to rebuild. But as time passed, I realized that the true test was not how I had fought for my inheritance, it was how I would fight to repair the most important thing. My family. I spent the first few weeks after the trial focusing on putting one foot in front of the other. I hadn't fully realized how much Lisa had taken from me until she was gone. The presence of her manipulations was gone, but so much more had been lost than I had accounted for. There was a lingering silence, a strange emptiness that had settled in the house. Daniel, too, had changed. There was a quietness in him that I couldn't quite place. It wasn't just the loss of his wife, it was the betrayal, the loss of trust in himself and in me. But we were healing, slowly, and that was something I clung to with all my strength. We had both made mistakes, and we were both learning how to forgive. One evening, after dinner, Daniel sat with me in the living room, his eyes on his phone, but his mind clearly elsewhere. I had learned to give him space, but I could sense he was still carrying something heavy. Mom, he said, breaking the silence. There's something I've been meaning to ask. I put down the book I'd been reading, giving him my full attention. What's on your mind? He hesitated, his eyes meeting mine before looking down again. I've been thinking about Lisa a lot, about the things she did. I can't get past how she manipulated me, but at the same time, I keep thinking about the things I should have seen. I should have been more careful. I should have trusted you more. I felt my chest tighten, the weight of his words sinking in. You weren't the only one deceived, Daniel, I said softly. She played both of us. It's not your fault. He shook his head. But I let it go on for so long. I ignored all the warning signs. I was so focused on the future I thought we had that I didn't see the truth. And now, I feel like I've lost everything. I walked over to him and placed a hand on his shoulder, feeling the tension in his muscles. You haven't lost everything. You've learned, Daniel. We've both learned. We are stronger now, because of it. There was a long pause as he processed my words, his eyes looking past me, deep in thought. Finally, he spoke again, his voice quieter this time. I'm sorry, Mom. I should have believed you. I should have listened. The ache in my heart softened. We all make mistakes. It's how we move forward that counts. And we've been through a lot, but we'll get through it together. His gaze shifted to mine, and for the first time in a long while, I saw the trust returning in his eyes. I'm ready, Mom. I'm ready to move forward with you. The air in the room felt different now, lighter. I could sense the shift in him, the moment he was finally letting go of the guilt and regret that had been holding him back. And in that moment, I realized that we were beginning to heal. We weren't just surviving anymore. We were finding a way to thrive again. A week later, I received an unexpected call. It was from a lawyer's office, or one that I recognized from the past. I had thought everything was settled, but as it turned out, there was one more thing to be dealt with. It seemed that Lisa's actions had left behind a mess that still needed cleaning up. I met with the lawyer, a sharp woman named Rebecca, who briefed me on the situation. Mrs. Williams, there's one more issue that we need to address, she said, her voice professional but sympathetic. It seems that Lisa's actions went beyond just financial manipulation. She had been involved in multiple fraudulent schemes using your name. We've just uncovered some additional evidence. There's a possibility she wasn't working alone, and we may need to take legal action against those who aided her. I listened carefully, my stomach twisting as I realized the full extent of what had happened. It wasn't just Lisa who had tried to tear apart my life. There were others involved. Others who had taken advantage of my trust. I'll do whatever it takes to bring this to a close, I said, my voice firm. I want to make sure no one else gets hurt. Rebecca nodded. We'll be thorough. This could take some time, but we'll make sure all the right parties are held accountable. It wasn't over yet. There would be more legal battles to face, more time spent untangling the mess that Lisa had left behind. But I had already learned one important thing. I was stronger than I had realized. I wasn't going to let her, or anyone else, take away what was mine, not again. The following months were spent navigating the complexities of Lisa's fraudulent activities. The process wasn't quick, but slowly, the pieces started falling into place. The truth came to light, and those who had helped Lisa were exposed. I was able to secure my estate, and more importantly, I was able to focus on rebuilding my life and my relationship with Daniel. One afternoon, while sitting on the porch, Daniel turned to me with a small, tentative smile. "I've been thinking, Mom," he said, his voice calm. "I want to help you with everything. The house, the estate, everything. I know I've made mistakes, but I'm ready to take responsibility. I'm ready to step up." My heart swelled with pride as I looked at him. "You already have, Daniel, just by being here, just by trying. That's all I've ever wanted." In the months that followed, Daniel and I worked together to take back control of our lives. Slowly but surely, we started rebuilding the trust that had been shattered. It wasn't perfect. It was never going to be perfect, but it was real, and it was ours. As I looked back on everything that had happened, I realized that the greatest lesson I had learned was this: the strength of a family doesn't come from the perfect moments, but from the way it pulls together in the face of adversity. And though the road had been long and painful, I knew that we were stronger because of it. Together, we had overcome the darkness, and now, the future was wide open. The morning after the final resolution felt different. It wasn't the relief I had expected, or the weight of a battle finally won. It was a sense of something more profound, the beginning of something new. The court cases had ended, Lisa's deceit had been exposed, and yet, as I stood by the window looking out at the early morning sun filtering through the trees, I realized the true journey was just beginning. I had spent so many months in survival mode, reacting to everything that came at me, the betrayal, the lies, the heartbreak. I hadn't stopped to ask myself what I truly wanted from the future. I hadn't allowed myself to think beyond the fight, beyond the need to win. But now, with the storm behind me, it was time to rebuild, not just my inheritance or my family's trust, but my own sense of peace and purpose. Daniel was still working through his own emotions, but I could see him slowly coming back to life, to us. The guilt he carried wasn't something that would vanish overnight, but he was making progress. I could see it in the way he held himself, the small moments of connection we shared, the willingness to take responsibility for what happened. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. As I walked through the house that morning, I felt a strange calm. The silence wasn't suffocating anymore. The house, once filled with tension, now felt like a home again, a place of new beginnings. But I knew that the next step wasn't just about fixing what was broken. It was about moving forward with intention, with hope. The next few weeks were spent rebuilding the foundation that had been cracked. Daniel and I worked together to manage the estate, though it wasn't easy. Every task felt monumental, but it was also something that kept us engaged, kept us focused. Slowly, we started making decisions together, small ones at first, like deciding on repairs for the house or how to manage the property. But it was progress. We also began to talk more, really talk, about everything, about the past, the pain, and what we wanted for our future. There was still so much unspoken between us, but with each conversation, the gap between us grew smaller. We were learning how to communicate again, how to trust each other with our vulnerabilities. But I knew that we needed more than just work to heal. We needed to rediscover each other, to create new memories that didn't carry the weight of the past. So, one weekend, I suggested something simple but meaningful. "Daniel, how about we take a trip?" I asked, my voice tentative. "Just the two of us. A real getaway. Something to start fresh." His eyes lit up, and for the first time in a long while, I saw a spark of excitement in his expression. "I think that's a great idea, Mom. We've both been through a lot, and I think it's time for a break." We spent the weekend at a quiet cabin in the mountains, away from everything, no work, no distractions. Just the two of us, surrounded by nature. The days were filled with walks through the forest, evenings by the fire, and quiet conversations about everything and nothing. There was something incredibly healing about being in the wilderness, no one to answer to, no expectations. It was just us, as we were, without the shadows of the past hanging over us. It wasn't just the scenery that made it special, it was the time we spent reconnecting. We talked about our favorite memories, laughed at old jokes, and even shed a few tears. There was an unspoken understanding between us now, a sense of us that had been missing for so long. On the last night of our trip, Daniel turned to me, his expression softer than I had seen in months. "Mom, I just want you to know, I'm sorry. I know I hurt you. I know I was caught up in everything with Lisa, but I'm not going to let that happen again. I want to rebuild. I want us to be okay." I placed a hand on his, my heart swelling with emotion. "I know, Daniel, I've never stopped believing in us. It's going to take time, but we'll get there, one step at a time. And for the first time in a long time, I believed it. I could see the road ahead. It wouldn't be easy, but we would walk it together. When we returned from the trip, things started to fall into place. I took some time to focus on myself, rediscovering the parts of me that had been lost in the chaos. I started volunteering again, getting involved in causes I cared about, things that gave me a sense of purpose beyond just my family's legacy. I realized that I had spent so much of my life focused on protecting everything I had built, that I had neglected my own growth. It was time to rebuild not just my family's trust, but my own sense of self-worth. I began to engage in things that made me feel whole again: yoga, reading, cooking, and spending time with friends I hadn't seen in years. I had spent so much time protecting my family's legacy that I had forgotten to protect myself. But now, I knew that I couldn't do it alone. I had to take care of me first. Daniel, too, began to find his own path. He spent more time focusing on his career, rediscovering his passions, and finding new ways to grow. I could see him coming into his own, and it filled me with pride. He wasn't the man he used to be, but in many ways, that was a good thing. He had learned, just as I had, that sometimes you have to go through the fire to come out stronger. One evening, as I sat in the living room, the house finally feeling like home again, Daniel walked in. He looked at me, a smile tugging at the corner of his lips, and I knew that this was a turning point for us. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice thoughtful. "I want to make a fresh start. I don't know what that looks like yet, but I know it's time for a change. I want to build something, not just for myself, but for us. I want us to have a future, a real one." I smiled, my heart full. "I'm with you, Daniel. Whatever that future looks like, we'll face it together. No more secrets, no more lies, just us." And in that moment, I realized something: the inheritance, the money, the legal battles, none of it had ever been the most important thing. It was always about family, it was always about love, and no matter what had happened, we had fought for it. And in the end, we would keep fighting, together. The future, as uncertain as it seemed, was ours to shape. And as long as we were together, nothing else mattered.